Hi, I'm Gaz Williams here for Sonicstate, and today we're looking at the Maschine Studio plus Maschine, the software, version 2. Maschine, what is it? Maschine is a combination of hardware and software. It's been around since about 2009, and this is the first major big upgrade, so version 2, which is a paid upgrade for sort of users of the old software. And at the same time, Native Instruments have decided to launch this, which is the flagship Maschine Studio. But I should mention, just to put your mind at rest for users of the older hardware, this new software is completely backwards compatible. Like for instance, that's my Maschine Mark 1, works beautifully on that, and you'll see many things that make the upgrade worthwhile. Okay, so before we look at this rather beautiful big piece of equipment, we're going to concentrate first on what the version 2 software actually brings to the party, because there is quite a lot of new stuff, which is exciting. So the headline new features, I'm going to refer to my notes here, are side chaining, unlimited groups, unlimited plugins, the arranger timeline, and my favorite, the new drum synth models. On top of this are countless other improvements. So after using the software only for a few days on the Mark 1, I was just struck by how, although it works in such a similar way as the old one, the new features just make sense, and you'll take to it like a duck to water. It's a very clever upgrade, this is. Browsing's been radically overhauled, and it's swifter and more predictable. Sort of a major shift, really, in the way it works is the drop-in of the confusing modules approach and adopts an altogether more easily understood sort of channels and plugins terminology. So there's a comprehensive tag-based browser over here, and that helps us narrow down the really big 8 gigabytes library. What we got in here is 445 drum kits, 388 multi-sampled instruments, 403 sliced loops, 8,627 one-shot samples too. And it also includes all the presets from any Native Instruments plugin that you might have installed that doesn't come as part of the Maschine package. So that's quite nice. I should mention that Maschine will act as a host for any other AU VST plugins that you have installed in your system, but they won't necessarily come up with the tagged browsing. That really is just for the Native Instruments plugins. So holding Shift and Browse allows us, I'm going to look on the hardware to demonstrate this, and we can see on these gorgeous AMOLED displays here that we can select like a plugin in its vanilla state. I'm going to load in Massive, and on the screen here it's nice, we get a little thumbnail of the plugin. But now let's just look at the software, and I'm going to get that up on the screen here. And on the software we have got new Native Instruments plugins, views of them rather, which are simplified and more compact versions. So you can get at all the features here of Massive, but if we were to unmount it here and expand it, you can get at the full normal version if you prefer. But I think that these new versions make sense because, especially when you start adding up more and more plugins, they take up a lot less screen real estate. So one of my favorite new features of the Maschine 2 software is these 5 drum synthesizers, which are now built in. So I say synthesizers, these aren't samples, but clever reactor drum models. And there's a kick, snare, hi-hat, tom, and percussion synths. And well, let's have a look at the kick one first. We're going to go to the software for this. And in the kick case, there's 8 different engines. And as I go through these, some of which are kind of electronic sounding, some of which sound, and there's a sensible amount of parameters for each one. And so if we would let's just go to, say, Tronic, very electronic-y sounding one. We can play around with these parameters. What you find is that there's a really nice solidity to these synthesizers, and they're especially good when you start to layer them on top of each other. So if I was to sort of be triggering two of the engines, then I've found that by making adjustments to the parameters, especially layered, you really kind of hear how you can really shape these fantastic new drum sounds. So I've got a kick loaded in there now. If I was to sort of duplicate that, I'm going to change a different model here. Okay, pad mode now. There's a nice way, really quick. I can set them both to the same loop, so playing one pad triggers the other one. Now, I'm going to jump out of here and start having a fiddle. So, as I mentioned, because they're like, some are acoustic models and some are sort of like electronic models, layering them together, just, you can go anywhere with these. Now, I'm going to bring in a snare. And we'll have a look at the snares. There's 9 different engines in the snare. Come across to the software and we'll have a little look through these. A nice, well thought out collection of parameters that you can adjust. So as I mentioned, I'm very much into these drum synths. I think that those alone are probably worth the upgrade price. But also, if you were to treat the machine just purely as a drum machine, then I think that these drum synthesizers probably make it the best sounding drum machine that I've ever played with. So along with these drum synths, Maschine 2 now comes bundled not only with Native Instruments sort of aforementioned Massive, which has been bundled since version 1.8 or so, but now comes with Prism, Scarby Electric Piano Mark 1, and the Solid Bus compressor. And the good thing with these are they're not like cut down versions, they are the full products which have, you know, previously available at full price. Makes it a very good value upgrade really, because these plugins would cost about €400 or so if you were to buy them separately. There's a new mixer view which gives you an overview of all the faders within your group, and also you can jump back and you can look at the group mix as well. This is a much easier way to navigate your project, especially as it starts getting more complex. So going back now to the software, there's these chains which are great. So if I now add a new slot and I say let's bring in a delay, they start to move across here and you have this display. It's had a reverb. And this graphical look now is a much, much bigger improvement to the previous version. Now, looking at the hardware on the Maschine Studio, we get these lovely little thumbnails. And we decide, as we move across here, we can select which one that we're currently editing, and all the encoders change to adjust those. And whilst looking on here, this fantastic new thing that lots of people have been asking for is we've now got sidechain. So compressor now can receive a sidechain input, and that can come from any group or any sound. It can come from the group or an individual sound, which you select here. So the macros has had a big overhaul now, and if we have a look at the screen here, macros are essentially shortcuts that you can pick particular parameters to have up, and for ease of use, especially when you want to get at the controllers, the encoders on the hardware. Previously, macros were only available on group level, but now macros are available on sound, group, and master level. So if we come down here and we can select what we want our macros to do. Snare, main, engine. So now I've set a macro up and I can just jump between the snare engines here. And on the next macro, I could choose a different thing. I could choose like the compressor, main, threshold. So we can see where the macros start making sense now, especially as we add more and more plugins in the chain, we can have just whatever we want displayed in the macro. So as I mentioned, the mixer is on the software is great. One thing that the Studio has, which sadly that the Mark 1 and Mark 2 hardware units don't yet have, is any way to access the mixer view on the hardware itself. But looking at the hardware, we can see how the mixer is represented here. And the back button here lets us jump up to group level, enter to go back in. So if we come back, I'm going to select Group A, enter, and it works like that, which is nice. In previous versions, scenes were all of a fixed graphical length, so you didn't know how long a scene was. Now, with version 2, if we look at the software, looking here in this scene, we can see that this pattern here on the E group is 4 bars long, and that shows, we can see that it's 4 bars long because we've got this now a range view. Pattern 1, which is just a 1 bar loop, you can see ghosts of it now, meaning that it's going to play each time. What you can't do is you can't click onto these. Basically, if I wanted to adjust the pattern, say I only wanted 3 patterns to play and I wanted to just delete 1 ghost, you can't. I would have to either create a new 4 bar pattern and delete the notes out, or create a new scene. One of the things that's really worth mentioning though with version 2, and really helps you through a whole bunch of the oddities of working with scenes, is there's now an independent loop, and I'm gonna have to demonstrate this on the software. We can actually create a loop that's independent of the scene. So I could actually create a loop that will span, say, 2 different scenes here, and then so that will play but as soon as I press a scene, it'll jump back again. So that allows you anyway just to kind of maybe do drum fill, which goes over into the next pattern. Previously, everything ended when a scene ended. So at least that allows us to do some quite clever stuff. It is worth mentioning, Maschine is not a DAW. Maschine is essentially an outgrown drum machine. It's a pattern-based approach. And as such, that has certain limitations. We might try to think of it and approach it like a DAW, but it ain't going to happen. So you do have to kind of work within that, which takes a little bit of adjusting to, and you need to sort of think ahead a little bit when you're arranging your scenes. One thing that is now in the software, which is great, is we can turn on a follow mode. So the screen will update and you can see what's going on. In the old version, you had to go into navigate and you had to kind of manually sort of adjust things on the hardware in order to see what you needed to see on the screen. So here's the bad news. Note repeat still doesn't respond to swing. When you're in pad mode, it's still decidedly a chromatic affair. There's no Ableton Live push kind of functionality where it gives us mappable scales. And also there's still no real-time time stretching. So time stretching is available, but it's an offline process. Native Instruments tell me that this software is a ground-up rewrite, so entirely new code. It's also multi-core compatible now, so when you're running it standalone, it's far more efficient. The CPU meter barely moves on the i5 Mac Mini that I've been using when I've been loading things up, so it's definitely a very efficient piece of software now. And apart from a few small details, all the new features of the version 2 are available to all the members of the Maschine family. So that's the Mark 1, the Mark 2, the Micro, and of course the new Maschine Studio. And Native Instruments should be applauded for their continuing support of the Mark 1 hardware, which is, it's over 4 years old now, so it's getting on in music tech terms. And, as I mentioned, it's virtually everything is there available on the hardware controller for the Mark 1. So big thumbs up there for Native Instruments. And the software, Mark II, especially with those drum synths, big thumbs up from me. So in section 1 of this review, we were covering the new Maschine version 2 software. But this section now, we're going to be focusing entirely on the new hardware, which is called the Maschine Studio. Taking a look at the top of the machine, and we'll look at the new sections. So we have these big color screens, which are very high resolution and very, very attractive to look at. Moving around here, we see that we've got this section here, which is this new jog wheel. So this jog wheel section replicates the shift and pad shortcuts from the other machines. For instance, if I hold down a pad, like so, I can now tune it. I could adjust the swing, or I could adjust the volume. We've got a dedicated events button, and within the dedicated events, I can hold down note, I can transpose notes, and I can also nudge them forward and backwards. Something that's also quite a nice feature is that if I was to choose like an amount, like I've set it to 16ths now, so when I'm nudging, it's nudging at 16ths. Go back to the grid mode and I can hit off, then I can move them in micro amounts. Go back to the grid mode and hit off again, and it'll jump back to the previously selected quantization mode. With having dedicated undo buttons is quite nice. Something I should mention now, the undo works in a take-based thing, so it will undo the whole of the previous take. In the older version of the software, undo would be, you'd have to undo every single beat of the take that you just recorded. So if you do want to do that, shift and step undo backwards and forwards there. So I think as an editing paradigm, that's highly improved. Okay, moving up from the jog wheel, we've got this little levels section here, and this can be toggled to master. So then this volume here is the master volume. If I hit group, whichever group I've got selected, this controls the volume for that selected group. If I hit the sound button, then we're going in on a macro level of the group, and I can say select different elements from my group and we'll adjust the sound of that. And there's a new Q mode in version 2 software, which allows us to audition patterns and samples. Really good for live performers. On the left-hand side of here, we've got 4 input buttons. And again, if we had our hardware set up, our audio hardware set up, then we could monitor what we've got coming in on our inputs, which is a nice shortcut for sampling. Speaking of which, I should mention the Maschine Studio does not feature an audio interface. So it simply is a controller. And some people might question the wisdom of leaving out an audio interface, especially on an expensive unit like this. Native Instruments say that this is called the Maschine Studio. It's designed to go into existing studios where people will already have an audio interface. This is a debatable issue, I think. I mean, certainly having a headphone socket on it might have been good, a very simple audio interface, but anyway, there's no audio interface on there whatsoever. So size-wise, it is quite a large unit, and I think as a reference, I'll just grab the Mark I. We can see that the pads, if I was to hold it over there, it's essentially the same. This is all laid out essentially the same. The pads are the same size, the encoders are in the same place. So we've just gained a little bit of extra real estate up here, and the depth as well is increased for the screens. So it is a very familiar layout, and users of the machine of previous versions of the machine will feel completely at home. Okay, so looking at the back, we can see there's now a power switch, which previous versions were bus powered. This needs power because of the screens. We've got a USB. We've got foot switches, which are only currently set to be in play on 1 and record on 2. MIDI in and out, well, MIDI in and 3 MIDI outs, and a Kensington lock. Beneath here now, we've got these fold-down legs, which look fairly flimsy, but actually very sturdy. And quite conveniently, you can tuck your Mac Mini partly underneath there, which I think is quite cool. So we're going to look at the screens in a bit more depth now, because they are one of the great features of the new Maschine Studio. Looking in here now, we can see that the left screen is like an overview, in this case, of the sample, and the right screen is a zoomed in. So this lets us, we can scroll around with the left and zoom in and out in the right. So, and if I adjust the start position, the screen on the right helpfully jumps in. And as soon as I adjust the end position, it jumps to the end. So now let's zoom back out. If we look at what's going on the software, we can see essentially what we're looking at is the right screen. And the software doesn't actually display the overview. So that's one advantage the hardware has over the software. Just jumping back to the edit though, I'm going to truncate that loop. So I've got make it a bit smaller. Now when I go to the sample mode, slice mode, I can choose how many slices I want that to be. Something that's really nice now in the version 2 software is slices can overlap each other. So if you want the end of one to overlap another slice, you can now do that. One feature well worth pointing out though is in the zone mapping. This is a really nice use of the two screens, because we can quite easily map. I could choose to add another sample. Let's just bring any sample in just for example. Okay. So I've got two samples and I can now choose where I want the key range to be and at which velocities I want them to be at. And the controls, it feels very nice and very responsive and they feel very accurate. Staying on the two screens for a moment, let's just have a look at how that looks like for patterns. Just going to go browse, bring in a song, navigate project, users, let's go down here and discard that. Okay, so now I hit the arrange button. Looking at the screen here, it's a similar kind of idea. The left screen shows a complete overview of the entire arrangement, whereas the right screen is again the details. You know, we can move this around. If you look at the left screen, you can see how the white box is displaying what we're looking at in the right screen. So having this overview all the time is a really nice feature. And from the hardware, we can adjust the independent loop, as I mentioned earlier. So we can set up loops and we can move these loops around. And all this stuff now is facilitated by these lovely screens as well. Other advantages of the two screens are in the browsing. If I was to call up, I want to browse, say, instruments, there's nice little pictures that we can browse. These aren't touchscreens, by the way, although I keep wanting to press them. But I can browse. I'm using the Jog Wheel here. I can browse the different plugins. So in this case, I'm going to go Prism. There's a click on the Jog Wheel, so I'm clicking and that loads in the sound. But now I can, if I navigate across here, I can move through. So browsing is swift and quite pleasing. So the screens there are very helpful for that too. So the screens pretty much in every mode. Here, just in sound mode, we got a small thumbnail of the plugin in question. And if we're in like pad mode, it's very easy to see what samples are mapped to each pad. So there's now a dedicated button for mix on the surface here. If I hit mix, it jumps to the mix view where we can see each of the sounds within this particular group. So actually, let's navigate out of here. Let's go. I'm going to select our drum kit sound from the mix, and now I'm going to enter into that, and we can see. So I can hit a pad and adjust the wheel, set its volume. If I pan across here, then I can now do pans, hit a pad and adjust its pan. So we looked at the top surface of the machine. This obviously is the white machine. It's available in black too. And I'm assuming that Native Instruments will release various overlays so you can customize the colors like they've done with the previous ones. It's a nice solid build to it. It's got a very pleasing quality to the build. The pads, I should mention, are the same as they are on the Mark II, which were a significant improvement to the Mark I. They sit slightly lower, and they've got this nice silicon glazing, which makes them very, very pleasing to touch. The sensitivity is terrific, and the buttons as well have this little click to them, which gives you a sense of positive action. That was introduced with the Mark II as well. So as with all machines, being behind one is like being behind an instrument. And with a studio, that definitely is taken to the next level. You know, there's a real sense of purpose, and it's a very engaging place to be. The coloured lights, they might not be to everyone's taste, but I find them really quite stimulating, and I really enjoy the different colours. So that makes it quite it makes it quite a human feely thing, the fact that you've got these lights going on. However, a big question is it worth upgrading to if you already have any of the previous hardware? Well, that's a bit of a tricky question, because this is a premium product, that's for sure. It's not cheap. It's 999 euros. So that represents quite a steep price compared to the other ones of the family. And if you consider that essentially all the functionality of the Studio, you can essentially achieve that on the little Micro, which is a street price of around 300 euros, then it's you know, it's quite a tough sell. However, if you're going to spend like a large part of your production time using a machine, if that's where your main area of working is, then I can see this being a very nice upgrade. It is a luxury item. You know, as mentioned, with no audio interface there, this is quite a, you know, it's a pricey piece of equipment for essentially just a controller. But those screens, the new editing paradigm, it's a very compelling reason to upgrade. So I think in summary then, I would say if Maschine is your primary instrument and you already use it and have plenty of experience with it and like that way of working, then I think this would be a good upgrade. If you're a new user, then I'm not so sure. I think possibly the Micro or the Mark II may well be enough, especially if you're using it in conjunction with the screen. And that really is what it comes down to. If you want to use it standalone without looking at the screen, then I think the Maschine Studio is really the only way to go. But in conjunction with the screen, then the other ones are certainly worth a look in. So that's about it really. That wraps up our review of both the Maschine software version 2 and this rather glorious Maschine Studio hardware. I'm Gaz Williams. This is Sonicstate. Thank you. Goodbye.